that's something that has carried me throughout my career,
Yeah.
leading with technology, leading with product.
Yeah.
And that's what will keep you viable in this industry.
Hey everybody, James Shepard here with another edition of the Merchant Sales Podcast. And so today we've got an exciting episode for you. We kick it off with Chris Sandifer, who is been on the front lines of recruiting and building 1099 teams for a long time, but also has a consulting practice working with ISVs. I always like to mention my little disclaimer that, Chris and Merchant Links, the company he works with, neither of those are sponsors or paid clients of mine. Just a really interesting interview to talk about kind of scaling teams. And we also talk a lot about trends of in the past and then what we're dealing with today and the future of that kind of 1099 model. So I think you'll enjoy that. And then, of course, we go over to my good friend Rich Norton and we get our sales tip of the week. I always enjoy that. And then Patti Murphy has some interesting statistics about debit cards, which, debit cards for a while, it seemed like, man, the credit cards are kind of taking over from debit, but now we're seeing some really interesting innovation there. So she provides some interesting insights along those lines. This episode is sponsored by Nativia and specifically Nativia Banking. So if you want to learn more about our sponsor and the professional card that they offer, which is a really awesome card, they have a bunch of benefits and rewards you can get as a professional in the industry. Just head over to nativia.com/professional. Let's jump into this interview with Chris Sandifer. Hey everybody, I'm here today with longtime industry veteran Chris Sandifer. How you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great, James. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. So Chris is the does ISO agent recruiting at Merchant Links, also consulting through Pay Advisor. So I know you've got kind of a long track record in the business because I was actually looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I know you and I have talked off and on throughout the years, but it was really cool just seeing how many different kind of experiences you've had, different companies you've worked with. So maybe you could share a little bit of that with our audience. Like, what's your story been like in this crazy industry, and what was your path to like what you're doing today?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I kind of got into it by accident. I used to build mortgage companies like mortgage banks. And then in 2007, the music stopped and nobody had a chair. And,
Yes.
at one point I found myself waiting tables to keep the lights on. And I get a random call from a startup ISO that, liked my sales management experience, wanted me to come in and build a team of reps. And honestly, I'd never stopped to think about what happens when you swipe a card at a purchase.
Right,
It just
right,
never occurred to me there's an entire industry, you know?
right.
So yeah, I went in there and kind of thumbed through a trade magazine they had on the coffee table before my interview so I could, kind of understand what they
Right.
did
Right.
and got the gig. We built teams. There were about 20 guys like me building teams of independent reps going out there with laptops and playing a
Right.
video presentation, getting us on the phone. We were negotiating with merchants, doing statement breakdowns. Bullets were flying all day long, right?
Yeah.
As a sales floor, we'd write 100 deals a day. So it was
Right.
pretty
And
good.
how long ago was that,
Oh God,
roughly?
that was in 2007. So 17 years ago.
Wow, yeah. Okay. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, I learned a lot there though. Our processes were some of the best in the industry. We were paperless in 2007 when no one else was. So,
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I remember
yeah.
when I got into the business, which would have been about 2 years after that, the company I was with, they would still send us the welcome kit that included some next day air FedEx envelopes, right? Because you'd have to get the paper signed and then you stuff it in there and then send it off and all that.
Yep.
So let me ask you this. So, looking back at that, 17 years ago, 15 years ago, that kind of time frame when you first got started, right? What were some of the big challenges that you faced back then in terms of recruiting, training, activating these agents? And then we're gonna kind of in the next few questions get into a little more of like what's happening today. But go back in time a little bit if you can kind of remember that and what were some of the challenges when you first started out?
Yeah. So unlike today, hiring wasn't really a problem back then because no one had a job and there were no jobs available.
Right.
So getting good salespeople who wanted to make an upfront bonus and get paid weekly, that wasn't that big a challenge, right?
Right.
We kept them running by giving them preset appointments and then teaching them how to kind of cloverleaf the areas after the appointments. The real challenge was training them on the fly because they
Mm,
would get, 2 days of training and that was it. We'd send them out
right.
into the field. And so you'd have to keep things really simple. You'd have to really break down the pitch to where they could articulate it The merchant could understand it. It was a value prop that was just sitting on the table. They could execute it. And then you kind of train them in the background. They were
Right.
1099, so they weren't required to do any training.
Right.
But every Friday, I would have a conference call and I would just bring value to the team by teaching them the industry and teaching them different, sales aspects, and sometimes turning it over to our top producers to talk about how they did it.
Right.
And, eventually they became knowledgeable merchant services reps.
Right. It's really interesting as you say that. One thing I hadn't really thought about till now, but like when I first got into the space, one of the things that it ended up being a really big blessing, but at the time it was really frustrating was, when you say a 2-day training, I literally got a 2-hour training. So
Oh, wow.
when I started, I was on this webinar, and the company I started with, they were selling the Hypercom T4200 series.
Okay.
But they had put a sticker, and I can say this now because they're out of business, but they put a sticker over that said Quantum 2000. Okay. So it
Ah.
was like, this is like their terminal. It's not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we had like a 2-hour webinar, and all it was about how to lease this terminal, very little about the payments industry at all. And at the time, it's like, oh my goodness, this is so frustrating. But that's what really, pushed me to say, where's the other training? Where's the other information?
Right.
Right. And I started searching for it. And eventually, when I figured it out, I was like, okay, maybe there's other people that are searching for the same thing. And that's how we started the YouTube channel. But I think there's so many agents over the years, right, that have gotten into the business, especially 1099. They haven't had the training that they wanted, or that they felt like they needed. They didn't have that confidence level. And then unfortunately, I think our industry, maybe more than any other industry in history in the US, has had more quality salespeople come through it and
Yeah.
leave. You know what I'm
Yeah. The
saying?
washout rate's incredible.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that goes back to that kind of lack of training and just, the there's not a confidence level that's there. All right, so let's do this. So as we kind of start to fast forward a little bit, let's look at, the last, 15 years or whatever, right? When you look at the evolution, and again, I know your story, you've got so many kind of going to different positions, starting different teams, building your own stuff. What do you look at and say these were the major kind of 2 or 3 big trends that you feel like impacted that kind of 1099 agent ISO like experience?
Mhm.
And how did it impact you and what you were building along the way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the first trend I was a part of, it was the free terminal program,
Yep.
right? So,
Yep.
while y'all were leasing terminals, we had our own Hypercom T7 Plus. It was the only terminal we carried. So our customer
Right.
service only knew one terminal,
Right.
but we gave it away for free.
Mm,
And when we did that, we never really argued about rates. We put everyone on 3-tier, and the bundled payments came with the technology. You got the technology free, you didn't have to lease it. Well, fast forward and Square, that's their entire business model, right? So
right.
we were really forward thinking, and that now every ISO has a free terminal
Sure.
program, but back then they didn't. So that was
Yeah.
huge, right? That
Yes.
that opened up the floodgates.
Well, and it's hard. I think it's hard for our listeners to even understand how big of a deal that was. Like I leased terminals for about maybe 3 or 4 months, and then I ended up going to an ISO that had a free terminal placement, and it just changed your whole sales pitch because before it was all about, hey, I can save you money, and then somehow I'm going to try to manipulate the pricing so that I can stick this lease in there,
Right, right.
right, and still save you some money. But then with the free terminal, it was like, oh, okay, wait a minute. I don't have to do that as much. So it kind of alleviated a little bit of that pressure of that. I mean, there was still that race to the bottom, but it kind of alleviated that a little bit, right?
Yeah, it did. And it really helps lead with technology. So now you're talking about the
Right.
terminal, you're not talking about rates. And that's something that has carried me throughout my career,
Yeah.
leading with technology, leading with product.
Yeah.
And that's what'll keep you viable in this industry, because the race to the bottom started when a certain company decided they were going to give interchange plus pricing to every merchant regardless of volume,
Yep.
and that created the biggest race to the bottom. It honestly got so bleak about 4 or 5 years ago that I realized I was working twice as hard and making about 2/3 of what I usually make,
Right.
because margins just went to like 28
Nothing.
basis points on average. Attrition
Right.
was up to almost 50.
Right.
It was brutal,
Yeah, it was.
and then thank God for Square. I never thought I'd say that, but thank God for Square. They came into the market like gangbusters. They led with technology. They said, this is our 2-tier rate. It
Right.
comes with the point of sale, and that
Right.
was it. And the market bought it. And now the market is accustomed to a two-tier rate structure coming with technology. I was at Fiserv when they made the shift
Mhm.
from Interchange Plus with enhanced bill back. And they went to swipe non-swipe to compete with Square. And they just lowered it like 10 basis points from Square.
Right.
And I'm doing the math and I'm like, that's 70 basis points of margin. Like
Right.
that's going to bring our industry back.
Yeah.
So that got me
Very interesting.
excited again.
Yeah. Okay. So we have free terminal placement. What are the other major trends you've noticed?
So, well, right now, the biggest one that we're talking about is cash discount, dual
Of course.
pricing, merchant
Right.
surcharge,
Right. Which
right?
which did kind of kick into gear around that same time, 4 or 5 years ago. It was already in existence, obviously, but really, really started to gain momentum. You kind of felt like that tipping point, I feel like, was about 4 years ago, maybe five, where it kind of tipped from being like a fringe thing to being, this is just a no-brainer. This is what we want to pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see what Visa wants to do. They still don't seem like they want to play ball. They don't want to really get on board. They strip the teeth out of cash discount.
Mm.
They want to go back now. And if your merchant on dual pricing isn't set up exactly correctly, they're going to start fining the sponsor banks.
Right.
So playing within their ever-changing guidelines is our biggest challenge right now because
It
merchants
is.
want this. They want it
Yeah.
bad.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
when I
We're
was at NAB, yeah, 50% of our new applications coming in every month was for dual pricing. It's
right.
crazy.
Yeah, we're still working on getting Visa on the podcast. Because of
Oh,
the settlement, there were some kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, gag order, but kind of like, they weren't talking about it, but because they're renegotiating some things. But I think the biggest, most interesting development there, in my opinion, has been this idea that for those maybe that haven't heard of it, but Visa is basically creating a list. So similar to like you have the match list, where
mhm,
once you get on the match list, it's not the easiest thing to get off of the match list as a merchant, right? They're going
right.
to be creating that similar list for merchants who are not compliant in terms of their pricing. Um,
Oh,
and so, now again, I can't share where I got this information or if it's official or all that, right? But this is the direction they're going. And the idea is if your merchant gets on that list, well, then that merchant can go to another processor. They can do whatever they want. But until Visa verifies that they are now compliant, then they're going to have a problem and they're going to get fines.
wow.
And so that's kind of Visa's the direction at least that they're leaning. Now, that's not an official policy yet from Visa, but that's what I'm hearing. And so I think it's like they want to get serious about it, but every time they want to get serious about it, the problem is that Visa's fighting like 7 or 8 really big battles right now. Um,
Yeah.
and that's just one of 7. And so I think they get real serious about it for a few months and then they get distracted a little bit with, well, now we got a $30 billion settlement we got to figure out, so um,
Yeah.
so there's a
They're
lot of
fighting
that,
a
but
war
yeah,
on multiple fronts all the time.
exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I agree with you though. That's been such a big challenge. One thing I want to go back to for a second, Chris, that you mentioned a little bit ago. This is a little off topic. I'm just curious about this. So you talked about how at the beginning, the
Mhm,
agent would go, they would show a video presentation, right?
mhm,
And then they would basically set them up for you to talk to the merchant, right? And close the deal.
right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this. I think a lot about this. Obviously we kind of as an industry got away from that, right? And we got more into like, no, we're going to train the agent to go close the deal as a general
Mhm.
rule, right? Maybe the newer agents, we help them out. Do you see us going back to that older direction as the complexity of the industry grows and it's more about the technology? Or like, how do you see the sales process evolving with all these changes?
Yeah, we're already seeing it. I sign agents that are coming over from companies like Spot On, and they're cutting their teeth over there, and they're coming over, and it's like, well, yeah, my sales manager just kind of did all that for me. They would close the
Right,
merchant, they would do the statement analysis, right?
right,
So I'm getting some fantastic salespeople that don't know how to do a statement analysis, right?
right,
And they didn't really have the proper training, and that was kind of on purpose to keep them, feeding at the one trough. And so, I'm always sending them over to CC Sales Pro. I'm always sending them to ISO Amp. I'm like, look, we got to put the tools in here
right,
because I can't break down all your statements. So that's not
right,
what I do as ISO agent recruiter,
right, right.
So, but we have the technology now that yes, we can get them where they need to be quickly.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So And I love that. Obviously, I appreciate the plug, by the way. I didn't pay him to say that, but I'll take it. But no, yeah, I
I
love it
send
though,
so
man.
many people y'all's way.
I know you do, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. So, all right. So, yeah, and I'm just so fascinated by that because I do think what's going to be really interesting is kind of defining the role of the salesperson in this new kind of vertical specific software world. And so I think a lot about that is, just what are they going to do versus what's the kind of manager going to do, or the third party close, or the software company. Like, there's different phases to the sales process. And I know the guys at Spot On, and I understand their model, because it's like when you want to scale up that fast selling point of
Mhm.
sale technology, you want that division of labor, right? Even in the
Right.
sales process, to say, you go get people interested, you show them what they need, you go, like
Right.
you know what I mean? And so it's, but then to your point, then when the agents get to that point where they say, well, wait a second, I could do all of this myself now that I'm starting to understand it. Then a lot of times these agents do come and they look for other opportunities. You're with Merchant Link, so they're looking at that. They're looking at other opportunities because, they're like, hey, I want to build my own payments business. And so I think one of the big challenges moving forward is just the viability of that, and what does that look like? You know what I mean? To be able to do kind of everything
Yeah.
yourself.
And that's a real good question. And that's something I like talking to agents about. I tell them, I say, hey, look, if you're going on board with one of the big three, or, Fiserv, Heartland,
Right.
Spot On, you're not making nearly as much as you could on your own, but they are training you well. They're
Right.
training you
There's
up,
a trade-off. There's resources you're
Yeah,
getting. Yeah.
exactly. It's a good place to cut your teeth,
Right.
but
Right.
once you can do your own quotes, once you can do your own installs, once you can go out and actually find and get your own merchants, you, instead of them, should be earning the lion's share of the profit, and you should be keeping that for life. And that's when I show them the different
Sure.
range,
Love
and
it.
it's the technology,
Yeah.
it's putting in the, statement AI analysis tool. That's incredible. I mean, because then they can just upload statements while they're out there in the field. And I put
Right.
that in everyone that I consult with. I'm like, here, to stand you up, you're going to need this, right? And you're going to need electronic onboarding. Everything has to be digital. The
Right.
heavy lifting has to be done by technology.
Sure.
But yeah,
Yeah.
they can start they don't realize that they can start a Spot On out of their bedroom, the way most of these companies started, with
Right.
one guy out of their bedroom reselling First Data 20 years ago.
Right.
You
Exactly.
know, yeah,
Yes.
that's how
Yeah.
it was at NAB, right? Mark
Yeah.
Gardner started as just a single rep, and he has the biggest First Data book on the planet.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Well, okay, so Chris, let's do this. I think this would be kind of fun to think about. So, we talked about 15 years ago and kind of the challenges then. It was like, hey, it's easy to recruit people, but kind of hard to train them and get them up and, going while they're out there.
Yeah.
Now, as you look at today, right? What's changed? What's easier? What's harder?
So what's easier, is definitely, as I said, the technology, right? They don't have to know statement analysis, but that's good, because statements are worse than ever. Like, I
They
see
really are,
statements
right?
that confuse me, and I'm like, look, there's so much hidden stuff. I had a guy the other day, he's like, well, I think they might be padding interchange. I'm like, this statement's 16 pages long.
Right.
I'm like, you're going to have to go through every line item and compare it to the Visa charts.
Right.
I'm like, there's tools that'll do that for you, but yeah, they're more complicated than
Well,
ever.
Chris, on that point, I will say one thing I have found really interesting as we see thousands of statements coming through. Um, the rise of like complex interchange padding has really gone up. Like
Yeah.
I've seen statements where they only pad debit. I've seen statements where they only pad credit. I've seen statements where they only pad certain credit.
Yep. I've seen that.
Which like it's crazy because when we started it, like when I started, I built the first version of ISOAMP probably 8 years ago now. And
Okay.
when I was getting statements in, I never saw that. They were always either, if there was interchange padding, it was like 20 basis points on everything, or
Yeah.
10 basis points on everything. Now it's really, and so it's like it's just not even feasible anymore for a human to, it's like
No.
computers are better at some things than humans. And this is one of those things, I
Right,
think, right?
right.
So yeah, but anyway, go ahead though. Yeah, that's one thing that's easier, as you're saying. When you say technology, we're talking about the resources, the technology to enable the agent to run their payments business more effectively.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I agree.
AI is great for that.
Yeah.
So, electronic onboarding, right? With
Yes.
DocuSign. I mean,
Yep.
that's changing the industry. You don't actually have to go out, meet the merchant, pitch them, then set up another appointment to come out and write them. You just send it to them, right?
Right.
Or you can have them, like where I'm at, we can have them sign on screen because we have an app. right? An
Right.
app for their
Exactly.
tablets. So much better.
Yeah.
It allows you to go to market faster. It also allows you to go to market differently. Like I've got partners that go to market via social media ads, right?
Right.
And it's just like, hey, click on here and
Right.
it
To learn
captures their
more and right.
information. Yeah, yeah. And they use that to fill out a merchant app and send it to the merchant.
Mm,
And now they're doing hundreds instead of tens with the
right.
same amount of time.
Right. So
So
that's what's easier. What's gotten harder about building a team?
hiring,
Hiring. Right.
hiring has totally flipped since 2007, right?
Yeah.
We're kind of in an economy where everybody who wants a job has a job,
Mm,
and has three or four suitors knocking at their door.
right.
But what I'm recommending is that companies look to millennials and Gen Z,
Mm,
because millennials and Gen Z have grown up disenfranchised with the whole big company mentality. They
right.
know there's no security in it. They've seen their parents get laid off multiple times. They
Right.
don't want a 9 to 5. They don't want to punch a clock and they don't want to do all that. More of them want to work on their own. They want to set their own
Yeah.
hours. They want work-life balance. And this industry is perfect for that. It
That's
really
true.
is.
Yeah, and they understand too that these different ways of marketing. They're going to be much more interested in maybe a
Yes.
social media approach or some kind of an online approach. I think the other thing too is they're going to be much more likely to embrace the technology, both in terms of resources for them, but also in terms of understanding a point of sale system or things like that that they might sell to a merchant, right?
Yeah. And luckily, point of sale has gotten easier, right? When we
Yeah,
started in this business, you had to have a license to sell Micros or Aloha, and that license would run you 10 grand. And then
right,
if that territory wasn't available, you had to come in under someone else's territory.
right,
You know what I mean? And you had
yeah,
to service them, you had to install them. But now,
right,
all these cloud-based systems, you can be a VAR instantly.
yeah,
You become a reseller of one of these, they do the demo, they do the install, they do the training.
hmm,
You're literally just setting up the demo and they're pitching it
right,
for you.
right.
So yeah, younger people being excited about technology, I think that's kind of where the
Mm.
future of this business needs to go.
Yeah, well, and I love too the point you just made is so interesting to me because again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is the role of the salesperson. And I'll give you my personal opinion. What I think is going to happen here is I think most of these 1099 agents, they're going to have two very different sales processes. They're going to have one sales process that is for that merchant that still wants that kind of general solution. Maybe it's a Clover, whatever, right?
Mhm.
And for those, they're going to go sell it, right? Maybe they have like one vertical that they dominate, auto. And so they understand auto repair. They have a point of sale system. They understand whatever it is, right? But then I think we're going to see many other merchant types out there. And I think the agents there are going to play more of a role of kind of teeing it up, for the software company, for the ISO, for the third party sales, whatever it is to like, I'm going to set up the demo and you're going to close it. I think that's kind of the
Right.
direction, right, that it's going. So I think it'll be really interesting. So let's go to that. Like when you look out at, 3 to 5 years from now, over the next 3 to 5 years, that's kind of my vision of it. What's your vision? What do you see as the future of maybe team building and kind of that 1099 world?
Yeah. So what's interesting is I'm seeing a lot of companies going back and revamping or reopening their ISO agent sales channel. I don't know if you've noticed that, but
Mm-hmm.
Global took theirs away for quite a few years. Now they're coming back out with one. PaySafe is big time wanting to get into ISO agent. They're wanting to expand that a lot.
Yep.
Um, Even Fiserv now, because they took it, Fiserv was all direct for a while, and
Yep.
now they're starting to open again because labor's so expensive right now, right?
Yeah.
Labor's going up, and as it does, all these big companies are going back to 1099 models.
Mm.
Um, so
Yeah,
as
that's really
that
interesting.
happens, yeah, they'll need to balance those training resources. And, I think it will be a culmination. You'll have a team of experts if you're a merchant. I think it's going to be a great time to be a
Mm.
merchant because it's
Yeah.
not just a salesperson writing chicken scratch on a statement saying they can save you money. Now it's like, yeah, let me get you with our point of sale expert. He'll do a demo for you. And, let me get you with our statement analysis team. She'll show you where all the savings are. And,
Right.
you'll have a team of people working for you. And that's good for the merchant.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. That's actually really cool. Yeah, I agree with you. Um, okay. So two other questions for you real quick.
Mhm.
First, if there's somebody listening right now who is maybe newer to the whole recruiting game, and they're like, okay, I just started at this company. They told me I'm going to recruit and build a team. What does that mean? Like, what are the tips that you would have for them kind of looking back at your career? What would you tell yourself, 15 years ago or 17 years ago as a recruiter? What do they need to know to really be successful? What does it take?
Yep. So you're selling the dream as a recruiter, right? And so you're looking for people who have that dream, right?
Mm,
You're not looking for somebody who wants the security of a base salary and they want to like rise up the corporate ladder and be,
right.
the CEO one day. You're looking for those people who want to they want to make money from home kind of thing. They've got a track record of doing entrepreneurial things, right? They may have joined MLMs, they may have, sold Mary Kay, things like that, but they have that whole dream of owning their time
Yeah.
and then being financially taken care of. And there's an entire, $1 trillion industry that services people like that doesn't really pan out,
Right.
and our industry does. So it's about
Right.
finding those people that have that dream and then showing them the money, like
Yeah.
showing them, hey, look, this is how we make lifetime residuals. And
Right.
this is how they build up. I used to do spreadsheets for companies to show them what a residual stream after 5 years actually does, the snowball effect. And
Yeah.
it's just amazing. It blows their mind
Mm,
because in 5 years, you could be making $300,000-400,000 a year in residuals, just
right.
passive income,
Mm.
you know?
And Chris, what are those people like? And what I mean by that is, you and I've done, I did the same thing, right, for a long time. And I think a lot of recruiters I talk to that are new, they maybe have the wrong expectation for, what these people are going to be like. They're going to recruit them. And then it's like they want them to be these cookie cutter kind of corporate employees that are just going to do what they're supposed to do, but that's not who they are. Talk about that a little bit. What are these people like? And what is it like to actually work with them and help them succeed?
Yeah, so a lot of times they're idea people, right? And if you're going to steal one away from corporate America, it's going to be because they've got great ideas and they're sitting in a place where those ideas are going stagnant,
Yes.
right? They're the person that they really do know how to run the company better than it's being run, and no
Right.
one's listening to them because they're just a salesperson.
Right.
And so they can see the flaws in the system and they know how to get around that, right? Or they
Yeah.
have a better vision for
Mm,
how it's supposed to be done. Like, hey, I can do it better than that. You want those
yeah.
people with that attitude, that say, I can do it better. I
Yeah.
want to do it better.
Yeah.
Here's where I see the failures. Here's where I want to fix it. They want to take that ownership,
Yeah.
right? They get gratification out of that.
Mm,
So that's kind of the
yeah.
personality type. And they're not going to work your traditional hours. They're just not,
Yeah.
I mean, what you really want that person that wants to be able to just leave at 3 o'clock and go see their kids play,
Right.
right? And doesn't want to say, well, mom has to work again, so I can't come see your recital. You want that person that has work-life balance. They're like, look, my family, my work, my hobbies, these are big to me. These are
Yeah.
big parts of my life.
Right. And then
And
at
I'm
the
not
same
going to
and at the same
sacrifice
time,
that.
they're willing to, you'll be getting emails from them at, 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night as well,
Yes.
because they went to
Yes.
their kids' recital, but they are very passionate. So then they come back home and they're working, they're getting stuff done. And so there is kind of you have to set your own boundaries, right? As far as like with your own work-life balance as a recruiter and a manager to say, when am I going to be available? How am I going to be available? Like for me, I always told the agents, I said, look, you can email me whenever you want. That's totally fine. And I will get back to you when I'm working, right? Which is a lot, but if there's a merchant that's ready to sign up and you have just an issue that needs to be taken care of quickly, send me a text message. And those that,
Mhm.
so you have to kind of set those things up, right? Because otherwise, I mean, they do tend to kind of work around the clock at various
Yep.
hours, right? So I always kind of, I always kind of struggled to get that exactly right to kind of figure out. It was always kind of a work in progress.
Yeah, I'm the same way. So I recently moved from Florida to Colorado,
Okay.
and the adjustment to mountain time has been a little challenging because my first
Yeah.
texts start coming in at 6:45 in the morning from my East Coast agents. It's
Right.
6:45 my time, but it's almost 9 their time. So I'm like, okay, I'm
Right.
working,
Yeah, exactly.
And then
Yeah.
at 7 o'clock at night, my West Coast guys are calling, because
Right.
it's only 6
Exactly.
their time and they've had a whole day and now they can talk to me about stuff.
Yep.
So
Yeah, it's always a challenge. Well, Chris, this has been very insightful. I always just love kind of talking to people who are in the payments industry, they're actually doing something, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I know in your case, you're doing kind of two different things, right? So before we let you go, I mean, tell us a little bit more about what exactly it is that you do and maybe what types of partnerships or clients you're looking for, as well as how to reach out to you so that those in our audience that want to learn more or connect could do so.
Yeah. So at Merchant Links, my job is to bring in new sales partners, whether that's an independent agent or a full ISO, ISV partners, community bank partners, anybody who wants, who needs a good relationship with a direct acquirer, right? We're direct to
Sure.
TSYS. We have our own sponsor bank. We have all of our own customer service out of Florida. It's 30-second hold time. So we are the service end of that.
Sure.
And so that's what I do in my day to day. And then I've had my consulting firm on the side for since 2013.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And yeah, I help ISOs either improve or launch or scale. I recently, before joining Merchant Links, had an ISV company, and they sell a medical practice software. And their competitor had it baked in, had the rates baked in. And so whenever they take somebody, they're like, "Hey, can you do our merchant too?" Like, we don't know anything about payments. And so they hired me, and I came on board, and I stood them up as a complete provider in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
We put in the right tools. They didn't have to know. They do a quote, and
Right.
then they onboard, and then that is it. And
Yeah.
so I do a lot of that, and that's really neat because people assume that there's a lot, and the biggest part of what I do in that is negotiating the Schedule A, picking the right acquirer for them, redlining those contracts, right? It's like, oh, I've written so many of these contracts, as an I know what's negotiable, what's not,
Right.
and then just standing them up, and then they're ready to go. So
Yeah.
that's what keeps me busy.
Love it, man. And then for those who would like to learn more about that or get in contact with you, where would you send them?
Um, I guess the base place, I always just give my cell phone number,
Go for it.
904-520-9101. You can also hit me on LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn all the time. You
Yep.
probably see me there all the
I do.
time. DM me on LinkedIn. I've got 25,000 connections in the industry here. So
That's
I
awesome,
can
man.
always pull together the right people to make things happen.
Love it. Well, Chris, thank you again so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And I just appreciate you jumping on here and sharing your insights with the industry.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
So I'm back here with my good friend, Rich Norton, who's hanging out in his car out in the field, and we're just recording these episodes and having a great time. How are you doing today, Rich?
I'm doing excellent. Always a pleasure. And I could talk with you for hours just about the stories of this industry. And we share. You've got wonderful talents, and I appreciate all that you do. You're the guru in this industry, and so many representatives are learning from you, including myself. So thank you for all you do.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And Rich, thanks for joining us today. So today we're talking about something that I'm really passionate about, which is setting your floor and your ceiling. And so let me set the stage a little bit. And then Rich, I want you to kind of educate our audience on this concept. So I think what's very important is that each of us have a financially and even in other aspects of our life, we have the idea of a floor and a ceiling. And so the idea of the floor is what's the minimum amount of money you need to make? What's the minimum level you're willing to accept in your relationships? What's your minimum standard you accept for yourself, health wise, whatever it could be, right? You have this floor. And then many of us also have a ceiling. Those who are very successful do their best to eliminate ceilings, but some have this ceiling. And it's kind of like, well, if I get to where I'm making $7,000 a month in residual or $10,000 a month in residual, well, that's all I've ever dreamed of. And so there's nothing left to fight for. There's nothing left to get up in the morning for, right? So talk about this concept, Rich. How do you see this concept impacting representatives who get into this industry? And what's your advice for the agents out there?
Yes, you want to think big and you want to set goals, because if you have a getting by mentality, you're not going to have great success. For example, if you set a goal that, man, if I go out this month and I write three, that means everything is covered. My bills are covered. Or if I write two, or if I can just get one, but what happens if you don't achieve that goal? You got three, that's two, that's one, you might get zero. So a lot of people make a mistake of setting the bar low. So set the bar high, but set it realistic and just make a commitment and go for it. And then surround yourself with people that are doing it. think better of yourself. Don't have the getting by mentality. And I talked about this before. If you just want to get by in life, just get a regular job. Nothing wrong with that if that's the
Absolutely.
mentality that you have. But if you're the type of individual that is a go-getter and you know you can accomplish great things, this is an amazing opportunity where, again, it's as big as you want it to be.
Yeah, Rich, one idea I was just thinking of, or story I had when I was 20 years old. It was the first time I was a sales manager. And I had this team. We probably had about 15 or 20 representatives, and they were out door to door selling True Green lawn care. So, spraying fertilizer, right? Um,
Yes.
and the way we looked at that was the goal was based on your annual revenue. So, if somebody's going to pay $100 a month for 9 months, that's $900 in revenue, right? So our whole region had this goal of you had to sell $3,000 a week in new annual revenue. That was the floor, right? And the best representatives were selling $8, $9, $10,000 a week. Okay. So, Rich, I had this idea where I was out in the field selling, and I was realizing that this is actually really easy. And most representatives just aren't actually working very hard because the goal is so low. So I brought my whole team together and I said, hey, everybody, our floor, the minimum is $8,000 a week. If you don't sell $8,000 a week, you're not going to work here. This is an elite team. If you want to be on our team, it's $8,000 a week. Guess, Rich, how much we averaged on my team?
Amazing how that works, right?
It was $8,000, and so it's like our
Yeah.
entire team. We basically dominated the entire top of the leaderboard because that was our floor. We kind of took everybody else's ceiling and we made it our floor. And it turns out you can do a lot more than you think if you set this and say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to accomplish it, right? Like, have you seen that where you see these agents that kind of are able to elevate these goals a little bit in their mind and get it up to a level that maybe is even surprising to themselves,
No doubt about it, because you first of all, you got to get them believing that. I think about a representative that we have out in California, a super sharp guy, been with us for about three and a half years. He was working with another merchant company and he was struggling along. And he goes, I'm doing pretty good. I'm writing about 2, 3 a month. On good months, I'm writing about 5. I said, man, I got to tell you, from talking with you, you're the type of guy, without a doubt, if you just kind of tweak a couple things, make a commitment, start believing in yourself, that you can write 10 to 15 a month. There's no day. Goes, are you kidding me? You think I can get to that point? I said, absolutely. There's no question in my mind. I believe that, but we have to get you believing in that,
Right.
because you're not going to accomplish that if you don't believe in that yourself. Well, guess what? He went through our training. He couple years now, that's what he averages, about 12 to 15 every single month. He's making more money than he's ever made. He wins all the trips that we have because he had to just adjust his mindset, change the mindset. And it's amazing how that works. If you really believe you can do it, like I told him, we believe you can do it. You've got to believe you can do it and make that commitment.
I love it. So, Rich, I know you've been really gracious in actually sharing your personal number on the podcast over and over again so people can reach out to you, have these conversations, see if maybe they're even a good fit for your team, but mostly just to connect and kind of understand the industry better and think through their mindset and their goal setting. So what would be the information you want to share with them on how to reach out to you and get in contact?
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, because we get a lot of people that are not only in this industry, but as you know, from all sales backgrounds, and
Yes.
they're reaching out. They're like, hey, I don't know if I'm ready for merchant services, but can I get some sales training from you? How much is that? And I let them know I don't have enough time for that right now. I just want to teach people how to do this business and how to give them an incredible opportunity with us. But maybe you and I can do something down the road when it comes to that. But the phone number for me, reach out to me, 904-434-4635. Leave me a message, text me if I don't answer, or you can email me at payrock, Payroc, Rich Norton @gmail.com.
Thanks, Rich.
So, James, I have some interesting statistics I want to share with folks today. You know how, I try not to do these stats a lot because it kind of like, it's a lot to grab. But sometimes some really interesting stuff comes across my desk that I really think is important to share.
Sure.
And this week, I want to talk about debit cards because it looks like debit cards are now being used by more Americans for more purchases, and they're spending more in the process. This is according to a just released study by Pulse, which of course is the debit network that's owned by Discover.
Right.
And of course, Discover and Cap One are coming together. So,
Right.
yeah, but Pulse has been doing this for quite some time, and it's not just on its data. It takes data from,
Right.
all different sources to come up with this
Right.
information. And according to the study, better than 8 in 10 demand deposit accounts now come with debit cards, and roughly 2/3 of those cards are active. This means they're used at least once a month. Now, here are some specifics findings. They're all averages, but averages are statistically legitimate.
Right.
So active card holders completed just shy of 35 transactions a month on average. 30.7 were at the point of sale.
Okay.
2 were account to account transfers, and 1.9 were ATM transactions.
Okay.
Now, I just find that really interesting because I remember when Pulse was one of the first ATM networks. We called them ATM networks back then.
Right.
Came online, and and I remember when they first went out trying to get people to use it at the point of sale, how tough a sale that was. And now look at where we are.
Right. That's the norm.
Times.
Yep.
The average ticket for these point of sale transactions is $46.89. The annual card spend is $17,274. And the annual growth rate between 2018 and 2023, was 8.1%.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty significant. And card usage is not just at the physical point of sale. 32% of consumers say debit is their preferred method for online payments. I know I use my debit card a lot for online payments. Credit cards rank second for online purchases with 26%, saying, consumers saying this is how they like to pay for online purchases. PayPal came in third with 15%. Your preferred method, Apple Pay, ranked fourth with 7%.
Okay.
And other digital wallets barely made a bleep. They were about 2%. Mobile devices were used to originate 7% of all debit card transactions and 15% of in-store purchases, with Apple Pay being the most popular. 38% of debit cards are loaded onto digital wallets. That's pretty significant.
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, almost 4 in 10. And debit card issuers reported an average of 3 digital wallet transactions per active card holder per month last year, with an average ticket of $27.69.
Yep.
So, as I explained, this is cumulative data. It was done by the management consulting firm Banking and Payments. It combined surveys and interviews with issuers and consumers across the U.S. and includes issuers of Discover, MasterCard, and Visa debit cards that participate in a range of unaffiliated debit networks. So I think the data is pretty firm.
Yeah.
And, when you look at how debit has sort of like grown in popularity, I mean, I remember just maybe like 10 years ago, the average debit ticket was under $12.
Right.
Now we're at $27.69. That's pretty significant.
Yeah. Well, that's crazy. Yeah. A lot of that data did surprise me a little bit, as far as just the prevalence of the debit card. And I think one of the things I do think is going to drive that even more as we move forward is just there are a lot of programs. I mean, look at our sponsor, Nativia and Nativia Banking. Like, there are just a lot of programs around things like that. You look at Chime and all these others. Those are most of these kind of fintech, banking neobanks are using debit rails. And so I think a lot of the innovation is there. It's a lot easier to spin up a debit platform, debit issuing, than it is credit. So we're going to see more and more of that.
And the other thing is, when I was coming of age, everything was about checks. Right. Now you see these accounts like Chime and the low cost DDAs at many of the major banks, they
Right.
don't even give anybody checks. They give them debit cards. A debit card has
Right.
become the modern day check.
Right. Yep. I love it.
Yeah.
It's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. So, well, thanks as always, Patti, for keeping us in the loop.
Sure thing.